Hello, this is Professor Allison Liu with PH 100 or Public Health 100 at Carolina University, and this is Lifespan Nutrition, Pregnancy, Infancy, and Childhood, Lecture G in this course. So let's get started. These are the relevant parts of our textbook, chapters 13 and 14, from the Human Nutrition textbook at the University of Hawaii, Manoa, which is available online. Let's start with pregnancy. First, we're going to go over really quickly some terms that are important. Pregnancy is the development of a zygote, embryo, into a fetus in preparation for childbirth. And those are the three stages: zygote, embryo, and fetus. And also there's three stages of pregnancy: the first trimester, the second trimester, and the third trimester, and they're equally divided. The third trimester, at the end of that, that's when childbirth occurs. And infancy is the earliest part of childhood. It is the period from birth until the first birthday. Toddlerhood occurs from ages 1 to 3, and that is the end of early childhood. Then we have childhood, which is the period from birth to 18. And so sometimes you'll hear anything, after age 4 just referred to as childhood, but it's technically from birth to 18. The onset of puberty is an important milestone that can occur anywhere from age 9 to 14, which is the beginning of adolescence. Older adolescence is a stage that takes place between ages 14 and 18. Adulthood is the period from the end of adolescence to the end of life and begins at age 18 in the US and 19 in some other countries. Middle age is the period of adulthood that stretches from age 45 to 64, and senior years or old age extends from age 65 until the end of life. So as a mother's body changes during pregnancy, so do her nutritional needs. Pregnant women must consume more calories and nutrients in the second and third trimesters than other adult women. Notice I did not say the first trimester. We'll get to that in a moment. So here are the micronutrient needs for non-pregnant women and pregnant women. As you can see, they mostly go up. Important ones to look at is folate. Non-pregnant women, that's 400. Pregnant women, 600. Also iron, 18 for non-pregnant women, 27 for pregnant women. So big increase there. Then we have the body mass index and pregnancy table, which shows you the pre-pregnancy BMI with the recommended weight gain for that BMI. So a woman that starts underweight at the beginning of pregnancy will need to gain 28 to 40 pounds, normal weight 25 to 35, overweight 15 to 25, and obese 11 to 20. So even obese women, despite the fact that they start out at a BMI that's an obese range, they still need to gain weight during pregnancy, just not as much. All right, so starting weight impacts pregnancy outcome. Starting weight below or above the normal range can lead to different complications. Now, we've talked about before that being underweight or overweight, neither one is very healthy, right? Or being obese, and none of that is healthy. So these are the risks that take place in pregnancy if someone has a BMI outside the normal range. Pregnant women with a BMI below 20, so that's underweight women, and then women on the very low side of normal, are at higher risk of preterm delivery and an underweight infant. Pregnant women with a pre-pregnancy BMI above 30 have an increased risk of cesarean section during delivery. Therefore, it is optimum to have a BMI in the normal range prior to pregnancy. Healthy maternal weight prior to pregnancy increases the likelihood of a good outcome. So let's talk about intake during pregnancy. During the first trimester, a pregnant woman has the same energy requirements as normal and should consume the same number of calories as usual. However, as the pregnancy progresses, a woman must increase her calorie intake. Okay? So the first trimester, eating the same number of calories. Second and third, we'll need to eat more. One issue that happens often early in pregnancy is morning sickness, as it's colloquially called, which is basically nausea and or vomiting during pregnancy. It often occurs at the beginning and resolves by 3 or 4 months, but some people actually have it throughout pregnancy. It may be mild, it may be severe, depends on the woman, and some people don't get it at all. So sometimes that makes it difficult to consume a normal number of calories during the first trimester, especially but it depends on the woman. If there are concerns about not getting enough calories, not gaining weight properly, then often the medical provider will refer the woman for additional care, often with a registered dietitian, or they can provide additional education another way to make sure that this woman is getting information she needs or treatment she needs to make sure she's going to gain enough weight during the pregnancy so the fetus will be healthy. So here's some helpful nutritional tips. Pregnant women need to eat an iron-rich diet and or iron-fortified foods. These include meat alternatives, breads, and cereals, because the breads and cereals often have this fortification with iron to help satisfy increased needs for iron and prevent iron deficiency anemia. As we saw in the table about micronutrients, women's needs for iron during pregnancy really increases a lot, and by the end of the pregnancy, many people that are pregnant are actually anemic. And then they also need to include the vitamin C rich foods such as orange juice, broccoli, and strawberries to enhance iron absorption, okay? We need that vitamin C present in order to absorb iron properly. And then eat a well-balanced diet including fruits, vegetables, whole grains, calcium-rich foods, lean meats, and a variety of cooked seafood, excluding fish that is very high in mercury, such as swordfish and shark, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a moment. And then pregnant women need to drink additional fluids, water especially. Also, good tip for pregnant women, they need to make sure they're getting enough fiber because constipation is really common during pregnancy, especially late pregnancy. So if they're getting enough fiber along with those fluids, they can decrease their chances of constipations, which is pretty uncomfortable for them. All right, so let's talk about foods to avoid or mostly avoid during pregnancy. Alcohol. Alcohol should be avoided during pregnancy if it's consumed in large amounts or even moderate amounts. Small amounts, yeah, very small amounts don't usually make a difference. But it's when there's too much alcohol, you can get fetal alcohol syndrome, okay? So no one wants to take a chance on that. It's a pretty significant syndrome. And alcohol is generally avoided during pregnancy because of that. Caffeine, remember that caffeine is found in coffee, tea, cola, chocolate, and other things. So caffeine consumption needs to be low or just not at all during pregnancy. Avoid foods that could be contaminated with listeria. Listeria can cause listeriosis, which is a disease that can actually terminate the pregnancy and, women lose their babies. So they can also be very dangerous to the woman too. So listeria can be found in unpasteurized dairy products and soft cheeses, cold cuts, uncooked hot dogs, lunch meats. If women that are pregnant want to eat cold cuts, uncooked hot dogs, well, no, they shouldn't eat uncooked hot dogs at all. But if they want to eat cold cuts, hot dogs, and lunch meats, they need to warm them, okay, to make it a little safer. And then they need to avoid pates and uncooked meat. So we had an issue with listeriosis in our area not that long ago, it was a decade or so ago. And what was happening is a group of individuals were purchasing unpasteurized milk from a dairy truck. And it also wasn't refrigerated, which made it even worse. So this milk was not intended for consumption in that state. And what they were doing is making a soft cheese from it and then consuming that soft cheese. So the whole population of people that was enjoying this, of all of them, the people that got sick were the pregnant women. And you might wonder, why is that? Why do the pregnant women get sick? Well, the reason for that is when women are pregnant, their immune system is a little bit immunosuppressed. The reason for that is so that the pregnancy won't be rejected. Because if you really think about it, the fetus has different genes than the mother. So the body has to suppress the immune system a little bit so that the fetus won't be rejected. But that also decreases the woman's ability to fight infection. So listeriosis occurred in these women. Some babies were lost. It was very sad. Some women got very sick. And it was illegal to sell the milk off the dairy truck like that, but it was happening anyway. So we can really help by educating the public about the risk of listeria and listeriosis during pregnancy and making sure that women are avoiding these foods. All right, let's talk about heavy metal contaminants. So heavy metal contaminants, particularly mercury, lead, and cadmium, pose a risk to pregnant mothers. As a result, vegetables should be washed thoroughly and have their skins removed to avoid consuming these heavy metals. Maintaining good iron status helps women not to absorb these heavy metals, interestingly. So it's another reason to try to avoid anemia during pregnancy by having good iron intake and vitamin C intake. And so the having good iron status is really just another layer of protection against the heavy metal contaminants. Okay, let's talk about fish consumption during pregnancy. Pregnant women can eat fish, ideally 8 to 12 ounces of different types each week. Having a variety of different fish is useful, as we'll see. Expectant mothers are able to eat cooked shellfish, such as shrimp, farm-raised fish, such as salmon, and a maximum of 6 ounces of white tuna. The canned light tuna is preferred over the canned white tuna, and that is because it contains lower mercury levels. The canned light tuna that's preferred is actually less expensive. It's also made of smaller fish. The other tuna, the white tuna, is actually made of that's bigger fish, and they have more exposure to the methyl mercury. So we don't want to eat those during pregnancy or eat very little of them. That's why it limits it to 6 ounces. So it's very important for pregnant women to avoid fish that are very high in methyl mercury, and those include shark, swordfish, tilefish, and king mackerel, okay? All right, so when the pregnancy is over and childbirth occurs, then women that are pregnant and go through childbirth and are anemic need to replace their iron stores. And so sometimes they'll be given iron supplements or even IV iron to try to do that. Also, if they're breastfeeding, they'll need to make sure they're consuming enough calories for breastfeeding because they have to consume more to be able to make the milk. They also, just in general, pregnant women need to just take really good care of themselves after the baby's born as much as possible to try to just recover from childbirth and pregnancy. So now let's talk about infancy. A healthy diet not only affects growth, but also immunity, intellectual capabilities, and emotional well-being. One of the most important jobs of parenting is to make sure that children receive adequate amounts of needed nutrients to provide a strong foundation for the rest of their lives. So this is an important job. It's easier said than done, but parents need to try to do this as much as possible. So let's talk about breastfeeding for a moment. Breast milk is the ideal food for human babies. Mothers who are breastfeeding are, quote, lactating or making breast milk for their babies. Breastfeeding is a personal choice. The only healthy alternative to breastfeeding is feeding commercially produced infant formula. No other milk is adequate for human babies. So cow's milk, not adequate for human babies. Goat's milk, not adequate for human babies. Soy milk, not adequate for human babies. Only commercially produced infant formulas are adequate for human babies. Now, those formulas are certainly made from those other milks, but they are prepared in a way to make them nutritionally healthy for human babies. All right, so some mothers cannot breastfeed for a medical or a personal reason, and they're bottle feeding their babies with infant formula. All right, so let's talk about the benefits of breastfeeding. Breast milk has antibodies and lactoferrin in breast milk to protect the infant. So when a mother is exposed to germs, bacteria, viruses, her body makes immune cells to fight that off. And those antibodies will actually be transferred to the baby during breastfeeding, okay? So that's actually very good protection for the baby. It keeps the baby healthier. So that's a benefit of breast milk that we really can't produce in commercially prepared formula. We can't make that and put it in the formula. Plus, it's whatever the mother is exposed to is often what the baby is exposed to. So they're exposed to the same germs. And she's essentially giving the antibodies to her baby for the very things she's being exposed to and the baby's being exposed to at the same time. The iron in breast milk is absorbed more easily because the iron is bound to lactoferrin. It is not available for bacteria in the gut to use as a growth factor. So that's an important breast milk benefit. The feces that babies produce, if they're breastfed exclusively, do not smell because breastfed infants have different bacteria in their gut. Once the baby starts eating solid foods, now the feces will start to smell. But before that, when they're only having breast milk, there's not really a smell to their feces. So breast milk is always available and is always at the correct temperature. So it can be very convenient. At first, it can be a little bit difficult to learn for the mother or for the baby to learn. Also, they're learning too. Or there may be some complications early on, typically. But, once breast milk is being produced and breastfeeding is going well, it's very, very convenient. Breastfed infants are less likely to have constipation. They're pretty much never constipated. Breastfeeding ostensibly is free. Though purchasing additional supplies like a pump and bottles to express milk may require some expense, and also women do have to eat more, but it's the closest thing to free you can have with feeding an infant. Breast milk contains the fatty acids DHA and EPA, which are vital to brain and vision development. Okay, so what about bottle-fed infants that are fed commercially prepared formulas? Formula does not contain immunoprotective factors, unfortunately. Formula contains more iron than breast milk, but it isn't absorbed as easily. The feces of bottle-fed infants produced tends to be foul-smelling in odor. Formula must be prepared, refrigerated for storage, and warmed before given to an infant. So there's a lot of prep work that you don't have to do when you're breastfeeding. Bottle-fed infants are more likely to have constipation for sure. And formula must be purchased and is expensive, typically costing about $1,200 in the first year. Some formulas do have DHA and EPA, but we're not perfect at making the formula as good as breast milk. It's not as good. And so breast milk is the superior food. So we like to encourage breastfeeding. 83% of U.S. babies start out breastfeeding. We'd like to increase that number. And from birth to 28 days, newborns require 8 to 12 breastfeedings a day. Bottle-fed babies eat slightly less often, but they still eat really, really often. At 1 to 2 months, babies become more efficient feeders and feed less often, but are still getting enough milk. So they just get better at breastfeeding. At around 6 months, babies start to eat solid foods. Gradually, more and more, they eat solid foods. And foods added to the breast milk diet are called complementary foods. So here are some barriers to breastfeeding. Learning to position the baby for feeding can be a little difficult at first. And there's different ways to position the baby. And it's important to know different ones that can be healthy about breastfeeding. So that can be, take some time to kind of learn the correct way to position the baby, the correct way for the baby to latch on. The baby has some learning to do too. And then painful breast engorgement can happen during the first 3 to 5 days after birth. Basically, the body is making a little too much milk, and it has to equilibrate that. There's a negative feedback loop with the hormones that allow breastfeeding to take place, and so the body has to kind of get all that in balance in order to make enough milk for the baby, but not too much. Then there can be sore nipples that can occur pretty often, and they go away with proper breastfeeding techniques, but at first that can make things difficult. And then feeling uncomfortable breastfeeding or breastfeeding in some places, such as in public, that can make breastfeeding harder. And then a lack of adequate places to express or pump breast milk at work is a major factor when women go back to work that is a barrier to breastfeeding. So here's a breast pump. This is a really nice breast pump made by Medela. This is a very popular brand. You can see here that it has a DC electrical outlet connector. And there's also a storage place for the milk. These shields right here are placed against the breast and the nipple in the middle. And the pump actually mimics the suckling of a baby and will have the milk fall down into the bottle down here. So that's how they work, and they use both at the same time normally, one for each breast. And then that milk is stored and refrigerated or sometimes frozen and then fed to the baby at a later time. So this is a process that takes, it depends on how much milk they're pumping, but it may take anywhere from, say, 10 or 15 minutes to adequately pump the breast. And women usually need to do it twice in a workday, something like that. So it does take time and effort. Of course, women don't have to pump if they're not away from their baby, although they may need to or want to, but they don't have to. It's when they're working in a place that they can't feed their baby that they would need to use the breast pump for sure. Also, sometimes women are needing to pump because their baby is premature and maybe still in the hospital and in the NICU and they can't be there all the time. And that's another time women might pump their breast milk. All right, so working mothers and breastfeeding. Now, this is something we can all help with because all of you are likely to be leaders in your various professional roles and occupations and vocations. So, employed mothers have been less likely to initiate breastfeeding and tend to breastfeed for shorter periods of time than new mothers who are not employed or who have lengthy maternity leaves. So longer maternity leaves tend to help people breastfeed for sure. But when people go back to work, employed women do not breastfeed as long. So one of the ways that we can all help is when we're in leadership roles to try to make breastfeeding a little easier. Remember, when you have a woman in your workplace who is breastfeeding, this is not going to go on forever. Most women don't breastfeed even an entire year, and so it's usually a matter of months. Often they take a few months off to be with the baby when it's first born. So it's not going to be a long, long time. It's a temporary situation. And it's important that we support women to breastfeed their babies. So some of the Affordable Care Act actually addressed breastfeeding and made it law to support women to breastfeed. So the ACA required employers to make accommodations for new mothers to pump their breast milk. They required a private and clean space within the workplace. That's not a restroom. You don't want to be doing your breast pumping in the restroom. It's just not a clean place to do it. Required adequate break time for women to express their milk. So remember I said it takes, usually twice a day. It takes about 10 to 15 minutes at least, sometimes 20. Those breaks are required in order to express the breast milk for breastfeeding moms, and they need those breaks, and they're required by law under the ACA. And then also required health insurance to cover certain breastfeeding services and supplies, including a breast pump. So that helps women get a breast pump that's adequate for their needs. So this is a picture from a website called Scary Pump Rooms. And this one is dirty. It really is very inadequate. It's dirty. It is private, so that's good. But that's about the only thing good about it. It's got equipment in there. It doesn't look real safe. I don't know what that is on the wall over there, but it just doesn't look like a good place to pump milk. Restrooms are even worse, of course. And what we need to do is provide a clean, private place that provides some dignity for women to express their breast milk for their babies. And remember, this situation is not going to go on forever, okay? All right. So breastfeeding recommendations, the WHO or World Health Organization recommends breastfeeding for 2 years or longer. The American Academy of Pediatrics actually recommends breastfeeding for 1 year or longer. Most American women are not breastfeeding as long as either of those recommendations. So infant formula is a substitute for breast milk. And breastfeeding is encouraged and is ideal. That said, there are medical and personal reasons why some women do not breastfeed. That is okay too. So I will say that there are some women that really beat themselves up if they're not able to breastfeed for some reason. They feel really bad about themselves. And I want to say, as the professor in this class and as a nurse, that those women need to be supported too. Because you can adequately feed a baby with infant formula for sure. And, women need to be supported no matter how they're feeding their baby. So we need to provide support to bottle feeding moms too, so that they experience the same joy in feeding their infants that breastfeeding moms do, because both are reasonable and healthy choices. So, no matter how babies are fed, healthy infants receiving adequate nutritional intake grow very fast. This is a growth chart for male infants, and what they do is when an infant comes in for a well baby visit, their weight and their length are plotted on this growth chart. There's also one for head circumference because that baby's head actually grows a lot. Their skull, their brain is growing a lot during this time, and so all of those things are plotted. And so you can follow a line for the baby's growth, and you want the baby to be growing at about the same rate or essentially getting higher on their growth curve. You don't want them to drop off their growth curve, okay? So a lot of times the thing that you see is there'll be a small baby, maybe 5th percentile or 15th percentile or 20th percentile, or a larger baby, maybe 90th percentile, 80th, 75th, or an average sized baby, maybe 50th percentile, and they'll just stay right on their curve or close to their curve as you plot their weights as they grow. As you can see, there's the months here: 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. And so you'll see them travel along one of these lines or close. If a baby is having plots along here and then all of a sudden drops down, that's a sign something may be wrong. And when they drop off of their growth curve like that, there's usually testing that takes place to try to figure out why, and then some nutrition education if that can help. There can be all kinds of issues that cause that, but they're definitely going to want to investigate it and see if they can reverse that. So failure to thrive can actually occur at any age and occurs when children are not growing normally, and you catch it with these growth charts. And sometimes they're computerized growth charts, but it just accomplishes the same purpose. So potential causes for failure to thrive include poverty. Poverty itself is associated with failure to thrive. Not having enough food, not being fed enough foods or adequate foods. So that would be even if they had enough that they weren't being fed it. Medical problems. So maybe there's an absorption problem or another problem with the baby's health that impacts their ability to take in the food, digest it, or absorb it. Those can cause failure to thrive situations. So requirements for macronutrients and micronutrients are on a per kilogram basis are higher during infancy than at any other stage in human life cycles. So that means, we're growing the fastest during this stage. And our nutrient needs per kilogram are the highest. Micronutrient requirements and breastfeeding. So all nutrient requirements for infants up to age 6 months can be met with breastfeeding. Breast milk does have little vitamin K though, and infants have little vitamin K at birth. So North Carolina and many other states routinely give vitamin K injections shortly after birth to newborns. And sometimes parents get a little worried about that, but basically we're just trying to make sure that the baby has enough vitamin K to prevent bleeding. I think we talked about that earlier in the course. The most severe form is usually if there's a bleed in the brain, and so we don't want that to happen. It causes brain damage. So exclusively breastfed infants will often need iron supplementation around 5 to 8 months after birth because breast milk just can't supply all the needs of the infant at that point. So this can be done with iron fortified cereals or other means. So there's little vitamin drops you can do, or iron fortified cereals can be added to the diet, and we discussed that earlier in the course also. Now this is something we haven't discussed, infants and dehydration. Infants are at greater risk for dehydration than adults. Initially, all the fluids a baby needs can be supplied by breast milk or formula, even in warm climates. Now let me just say, formula has very specific preparation directions, okay? Sometimes it's already pre-prepared and you just pour it into the bottle and it's ready. Then there's powdered formulas that you have to mix with water. Whatever the directions say to do, that is what you should do when you're mixing infant formulas. You never want to vary the directions because this is designed to be like breast milk, as much like breast milk as possible. So the directions have to be followed exactly in order for that to happen. You wouldn't want to vary the amount. And you wouldn't want to vary, put anything else in it besides the water that is required. Always follow the directions with infant formula. Once infants begin eating solid foods, they should be encouraged to consume fluids as well. So times that are greater for risk of dehydration for infants and young children are times when they have diarrhea or vomiting. Parents of infants and young children experiencing these should be on high alert for dehydration and ensure adequate fluid intake and consult their baby's medical provider for advice on management, because babies can get and young children can get dehydrated very fast. It can actually kill them, but more often what it does is it causes them to need to go to the hospital and get IV fluids for treatment of the problem often too. All right, so let's talk about toddlers. In the toddler years, the limbs grow much faster than the trunk. By the end of the 3rd year, toddlers are more slender and taller in appearance than previously. Bone density increases. Remember how we talked about the bones have to reach the kind of maximum density. So along this time, this is when bones are gaining more density, and they continue to do that for several more years. And then bone tissue replaces cartilage. This process is finally complete during puberty. Toddlers need to eat about 40 calories for every inch in height. Calorie needs vary based on activity level. So a very active toddler is going to need more. And all toddlers need small, frequent meals and snacks. That's just how they eat and the way they can eat healthy. Some toddler development milestones include self-feeding, running, drawing, and toilet training. So ways that we can help is to have adequate toddler meals. So here's an example of an adequate toddler meal: 1 ounce of meat or chicken, or 2 to 3 tablespoons of beans, 1/4 slice of whole grain bread, 1 to 2 tablespoons of cooked vegetables, 1 to 2 tablespoons of fruit. Oh, and here's a link. There's a link on here to the My Plate for toddlers. Right there. Visit My Plate for preschoolers. So there's a My Plate designed just for them. What helps a toddler to do this? Well, small utensils that fit young children's hands really help. Small cups that will not tip over easily. Plates with edges to prevent food from falling off. Small servings on the plates help. And high chairs, booster seats, or cushions that reach the table are helpful because eating is a social endeavor, as we've talked about before in nutrition class. So problems toddlers may have include picky eating, toddler obesity, early childhood caries or dental cavities is what that's talking about, and then iron deficiency anemia. So let's move on to school-age children. This is children aged 4 to puberty. They grow consistently but more slowly than earlier. They lose their baby or deciduous teeth. Their permanent teeth emerge, and there may be malocclusion. Those malocclusions can actually affect eating, but mostly they are not that severe. And then peers and their dietary choices start to make an impact on children at this age. What they see other people eating starts to influence them. Kinds of foods offered at schools and other programs start to influence the child. Some children develop tooth decay, and some children develop food sensitivities. The growth rate is 2 to 3 inches in height per year and 4.6 to 6.5 pounds in weight per year. The rate of growth of the extremities is faster than the trunk, and the long bone growth stretches muscles and ligaments, and some children may complain of growing pains during this time. Energy needs vary based on energy expenditure, but they're in the range of 1,200 to 2,000 calories per day. Macronutrient and micronutrient recommendations are higher relative to body size compared to adulthood. So it's very important that nutrient-dense foods are consumed to meet these needs. Remember how we talked about that's important for adults, but it's also very important for children. Overfeeding children can result in childhood obesity, though, and we've recently seen an increased rate in childhood obesity. Sometimes children are even developing hypertension or type 2 diabetes because those are related to obesity. Some children also develop food allergies during childhood, and the most allergenic foods in our diet are peanuts, milk, eggs, soy, wheat, and shellfish. Food allergies can be very dangerous. They can kill people and they can cause major complications. An allergy occurs when a protein in a food triggers an immune response that leads to a release of antibodies, histamine, and other components of the immune system to attack the foreign bodies, quote unquote. These foreign bodies, though, aren't dangerous. So this can be thought of as an inappropriate or overreaction of the immune system. So epinephrine is often prescribed for administration in these emergencies, and also an antihistamine such as Benadryl is also recommended. Now realize that the epinephrine is raising the blood pressure. That's basically treating an anaphylactic reaction. You can't really treat that adequately at all with an antihistamine. So the antihistamine doesn't take the place of the epinephrine. People with food allergies and that have any risk of anaphylaxis need to have epinephrine with them. But certainly the antihistamine can help, and they're usually told to take the antihistamine and the epinephrine when there's a severe reaction, both of them. But nothing replaces that epinephrine. Okay, so food allergies, there's a couple of reasons that we think might be causing an increase in food allergies, because we do have an increase in food allergies in kind of the in sort of the places that have more resources, honestly, places that have a cleaner environment in terms of germs, in terms of exposure to animals and just the soil and the natural environment. When people spend a lot of time inside, when the water is clean for drinking, meaning it doesn't have germs in it, in those types of places, there's actually an increase of food allergies. And what we think is happening, maybe, is that because the body isn't fighting off parasites and other things like that, this part of the immune system doesn't have anything to do and it starts attacking foods. This is called the hygiene theory. And so in places where children are being exposed to animals, the natural environment, soil, where the water isn't necessarily so clean, we don't see as much food allergies. Now, there's other problems in some of those environments, like infectious diseases may be more of a problem, but they don't develop food allergies. And when we talked about starvation in children, we talked about kwashiorkor and marasmus. Some of the places that is occurring where the children are exposed to the natural environment and lots of those germs, they actually use peanut paste to try to help the children recover from starvation and get their health back. And, people have been asked that do this kind of work, aren't you afraid the children will develop peanut allergies? And they say, no, we don't ever see peanut allergies here. And that seems to lend some credence to the hygiene theory. But we don't know for sure. The scientific community is still working on that. Okay, so let's talk about lead toxicity. Where is lead found? Lead is very bad for your brain. It's not good for children. It's not good for pregnant women either. And we want to try to prevent lead toxicity. So where is it found? It can be found in the plumbing of older homes. So older cities, older homes, they're going to have some lead in the pipes. So also lead-based paints. So lead paints were banned in the early 70s. So if the home is older than that and there's peeling paint or something like that, then you can have lead exposure that way. And then also the soil occasionally is contaminated with lead. Children under 6 are especially vulnerable to lead toxicity. Fortunately, lead toxicity is highly preventable. And you can do things like test the paint samples. Now, there shouldn't be lead paint in homes that are, early 1970s and newer, okay? But in an older home, sometimes even if it has been painted over, you'll have some chipping or damage to that paint. They can definitely lead to problems, and so you can test and see if there's really any lead in the paint. Also, children can be tested. Their blood can be tested for lead, and then there's treatment available if there is lead toxicity issue. Also, as with adults, pregnant women, it's important that children get adequate iron because it protects them from some of these toxicities, and that is also true in this case. So that is the last of our lecture. Please do your assignment and turn that in, and we'll see you with the next lecture, which will be about adulthood.